Hare Krishna, dear devotees and well-wishers. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today, I'm very happy to have this opportunity to interview Pranada Comtois. Pranada is a devoted pilgrim who sheds light on Bhakti, the path of loving devotion, which is known as the heart and soul of yoga. At the age of 8 years old, she started to become serious about spirituality and prayer. She was initiated in 1976 by her spiritual master, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. He was the answer to her childhood prayers to find the absolute truth. Pranada is a featured speaker in the film Women of Bhakti. Her first book, Wise Love, Bhakti, and the Search for the Soul of Consciousness, won multiple awards, including the 2019 Montagna Medal given for the most thought-provoking books that illuminate progress and redirect thought. She lives in Florida with her husband and is working on her next book, Prema Kirtan, The Sounds of Healing and Transformation. So Hare Krishna, Pranada, welcome. I'm so happy to be able to sit down with you and have this conversation.
Yeah, me too, Tiffany. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm really happy and interested to talk to you about your latest book, Bhakti Shakti, which I have had the opportunity to read, and I loved every moment of it. You're such a beautiful writer. And you made, this book is very comprehensive. And at the same time, it goes very deep into the process of bhakti and the glory of Srimati Radharani. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And it's meaningful to me to hear that it was something beneficial for you. And of course, as a writer, it's a lonely kind of service where we don't know if we can help anyone with our little service. But when I hear from readers, it's quite encouraging and helps me continue on the service that I'm trying to offer. So it's good to hear that it was meaningful to you. Thank you.
Yes, and in reading it, I was thinking how it obviously speaks to the practitioner of bhakti, to the devotee. But I also was noticing that it's very, like I said, it's comprehensive. So it speaks to someone who is just learning or someone who's curious about bhakti as well. So who is your audience? Who were you writing for?
Well, I really was thinking this would be a book to introduce Sri Radha to the broader community, to the yoga community, the asana community, to those who have heard about bhakti but haven't been exposed to Sri Radha before. Or if they had, they might have been introduced to her in ways that were less than becoming. I had read over the years, as more and more books came out for the yoga community on Durga and her manifestations, the different yoga goddesses. And the one or two references of Radha were a little shocking to me, actually. Obviously, they were coming from a different tradition, a tradition outside of the Krishna Bhakti tradition. And their perspective of Radha was uninformed and or not whole, let's put it that way. So I felt that as bhakti becomes more prominent in the world, and it's really making its way into the West, and it's coming in through the yoga asana community, but it's going outside of that community as well, through kirtan and just other things. Bhakti practitioners are coming out with their offerings. And this is really a first in the Western world, because bhakti really just came to the Western shores in 1965 when my spiritual teacher came to New York in 1965. And so we are at a juncture in history where it's very unique. this philosophy, theology is entering to mainstream gradually, like I say, through the yoga asana community. And so as it becomes known, it's kind of like we're getting pieces, little bits and pieces. And I'm trying to, with the writing that I'm doing, draw out a picture for people that is more fill out the picture about Bhakti. And of course, in Wise Love, in the first book, it was quite an overview of Bhakti. It was like, I remember thinking, I wish I had one book, because you can read the Gita, you can read the Srimad Bhagavatam, the multi-volume Srimad Bhagavatam, you can read the multi-volume Caitanya Charitamrita, you can read Nectar of Devotion, which is the most comprehensive text on Bhakti that exists in the world. You can read all these texts, but it's almost like you have to take these pieces together and form the picture, right? So that's a big job. And those who are practicing Bhakti, I'm sure, have discovered what a big job it is, because a lot of people don't even have the time to study it in depth. So with Wise Love, I tried to give the first picture. And with Bhakti Shakti, what I did was to focus on another aspect, a core aspect of the Bhakti philosophy, which is an understanding from the Indian philosophical framework perspective, the metaphysics of the fact that there are three energies. There's the material energy, the world of things that we live in. There's the unit of consciousness, the Atma, the soul, that is a category of energy. And then there's the spiritual energy, in our philosophy, our line of thought, considered the internal energy of the Supreme Person, our source. So when we have an understanding of these three energies, two of which are personified as the goddesses Durga Ma and Sri Radha, then we really come into an understanding of our relationship with ourselves, with the world, with the spiritual energy, with the Supreme Person, our source. And so in Bhakti Shakti, I wanted it to be a corrective for this misinformation about Radha that was coming out. And I wanted to offer an opportunity for the readers to broaden their perspective about who we are and why we're here and what our opportunities are here. And in doing that, from the Gaudiya Vaishnava perspective, the line that we are coming in, Sri Radha offers us the deepest and most profound opportunity. So what better way to introduce her, but to introduce her in a sense of what is our relationship with her. So that was some of the thoughts behind Bhakti Shakti. So the audience, I thought of the audience was going to be someone who had heard about Bhakti, probably didn't even hear about Sri Radha, the goddess of divine love, but had heard about Bhakti and had some interest or curiosity or wanted to know more. And I thought that a beautiful entry into Bhakti is through the goddess of divine love, who is the personification of Bhakti. We hear about Bhakti. What is Bhakti? And if you do a quick internet search, you can get kind of a feeling, okay, it's devotion, it's love, it's service. Like, what is it actually? We have these general perspectives, but I find them a little, oftentimes vague and not concise in the sense where, what am I supposed to do with this information? Like, I remember you said that I began my my prayer life at 8, and that's true. And I started a serious search by the time I was 12, 13. And I began really reading voraciously into all the traditions. And what I kept coming across in my reading was, okay, that's interesting. Now, how do I apply it? What am I supposed to do with this information? Some of it was, I felt, superficial and not my way, so I would not follow that. And some things I felt like, okay, that's dealing with the mind and that's good psychology, but what is the platform of the soul? You know, I mean, we have a mind and a body, but we are souls within we have this apparatus that we can use, but the unit of consciousness that we are is where we should put our attention. So even as a young little girl, this precocious little girl, I had this sense and I kept on digging. And as I was finding more, like I felt like, oh, Death and Ouspensky, I was finding, okay, now I'm getting closer to something here. But I would put down the books and say, okay, but where do I go with this? What's the practice? So, I mean, how do you become realized? We want to become self-realized. We want to know ourselves. We want to come in touch really with the authentic self, and not the authentic self of good psychology, but the authentic self of the Atma, the ground of being. So I felt like I wanted to give this to the audience who had come in touch with Bhakti, is to give them really the whole meal. You know, we don't need appetizers here. We're starving to death. You know, we need real knowledge. And here I've been given real knowledge. I've been gifted it. I've been practicing for some years. And my spiritual master told us, if you don't share what you have received, then you're a miser. And that can turn into envy. And that's an unbecoming quality of spiritual life. So we want to be givers. And we have this extraordinary gift that we've been giving, so I'm trying to share it. And I thought that, you know, Bhakti Shakti, the genesis of Bhakti Shakti was, I had attended a Bhakti Fest in Joshua Tree, right? Are you familiar with the Bhakti Fest?
Yes.
Have you ever been to one?
I have not, but I have friends who even work at it when it's around, so.
Okay, so, you know, and then I knew of the Shakti Fest, and I had seen some pictures, and I knew, you know, it was kind of like an extension of Bhakti Fest, but it was more focused on the goddess. And as a voracious reader, I was already aware that Durga had come into the collective consciousness of the West, so to speak. She entered in kind of like in the 70s and has become more and more prominent. So even though I was kind of like had my, you know, tuned in to the discussion of feminism and goddesses, and I would hear about the earth goddesses, and indigenous goddesses, Greek, Celtic, Roman, all these more ancient goddesses. And then Durga became so prominent. And I thought, you know, that's really beautiful, but they're really missing out not knowing about Sri Radha, you know. So I thought, when I was at the Bhakti Fest, I thought of this book, Bhakti Shakti, because it's so beautiful. You know, we hear the two terms, Bhakti, devotional service, Shakti, energy, but how often have we heard them together? That's different. So I wanted to explain the gem of what Bhakti Shakti means, the pure energy of the spiritual plane, which is divine love, which Sri Radha personifies. So honestly, Tiffany, I didn't write for those practicing bhakti. I wrote for those outside of the tradition, but I'm hearing from practitioners and even longtime practitioners that they are feeling a connection with Sri Radha. They're feeling an opening in their heart. They're having further understanding. They're opening a dialogue with Sri Radha, who's becoming more prominent in their lives. And so I'm just like very happy and honored that I got to be used to make a little offering to the community.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And absolutely, like you were saying before, to find out about Radha and our tradition, sometimes we have to go to so many different places and take little pieces here and there. And you put it all together in one place for us to just absorb. I mean, it's really an exciting book to read. The way that you've written it, I can, I kept thinking, of course, it's called Bhakti Shakti because as I was reading, I was feeling the energy and the flow of it. It just pulls you right in. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. You also mentioned wise love. And I was wondering, where does Bhakti Shakti fit in? Because you're writing a series, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I didn't know I was writing a series, but it turns out I'm writing a series. This was all. It's very interesting because I'm a witness. I'm an observer witnessing it happening. It's not something that I conceived of and then set out to do. When I was in Sri Radha's home, Sri Vrindavan in India, I was doing an Ayurvedic treatment to recover health. And while I was there, someone said, so I had already written Wise Love, and I had conceived I would like to write Bhakti Shakti, although I hadn't begun. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to because I was quite ill. But while I was there and I had been doing research for Bhakti Shakti, I had basically finished the research and felt like I could begin writing, but I was recovering the health. But while I was in Sri Radha's home in sacred Vrindavan, a very nice devotee had a discussion with him. And he said, we were talking about how to share the gifts of bhakti with others. And he said, I have this concept that I really want to share kirtan with a broader audience. I mean, it's becoming very popular. He's from Europe, and so it's a little less popular in Europe than it is in his area of Europe than it is in the US. But so he had this idea, and I thought he wanted to do it on the web. And I said, well, maybe we should do a book too. And he goes, yeah, we should do a book too. And so I said, okay, I'll write the book. And then he said, but then as I was, the third book is Prema Kirtan, which you mentioned. I might change the subtitle to Journey into Sacred Sound instead of the one that you had read. But Prema Kirtan is the third book of the series. And then the fourth book is called Living Bhakti, Its Wisdom and Practices. So what I found was Wise Love was a overview of the metaphysics of the Gaudiya tradition, the Gaudiya perspective. And it just kind of like touched on sacred sound. It touched on Sri Radha. It touched on the energies, but it was, it was a very dense book, and putting everything, I even kind of like put a little too much in that book. It was so dense. But so then as I explained, Bhakti Shakti is discussing the three energies and the goddesses associated with the material energy and the divine energy. And then Prema Kirtan is discussing the core practice of bhakti. So each one of these books stand as an individual book on their own, but I think you'll see as they come out, they're also a progression. They're like a flowering of this bhakti plant that is sharing. In fact, I think even in Prema Kirtan, I'm going a little deeper into my own experience of the practice of bhakti and what are the possibilities for anyone who would care to investigate this experiential spirituality, apply it, and have a first-hand experience of it. So Prema Kirtan is discussing the core practice of bhakti and sacred sound and the nature of sound in general and the nature of material sound and sacred sound and mantras and what sets Prema Kirtan apart from other forms of kirtan that we're seeing within the yoga community, because there are many types of kirtan. And I don't think that most people have a clear understanding that there are different types of kirtan. And the types of kirtan are offering us entry into different aspects of spiritual reality. and we ought to be informed about where we'd like to go. So I'm offering that in Prema Kirtan, and then in Living Bhakti, it's more like a handbook for if you're interested. Now I've laid out these books are coming from, almost 50 years of study and practice, and studying hundreds and hundreds of books, and taking that information and condensing it and presenting it in a way for a Western mind that is easily digestible. That's the offering that I'm trying to make, right? Because otherwise, entering into the world of Bhakti can be pretty intimidating, right? Because it's voluminous, the knowledge. I mean, we're not dealing with one profound text like the Quran or the Bible, right? Or one of the main Buddhist texts. We're dealing with hundreds of books, thousands and thousands of Sanskrit verses that are, each one of them, extremely dense and profound, dealing with the world of consciousness. So, I'm trying to give an entry for the Western person into the world of Bhakti. And those are the 4 books. That is the series. So we'll see. Prema Kirtan, I hope, will be out this year, and Living Bhakti next year.
Good. I hope so. I can't wait to read both of them. They sound incredible.
We'll see. You'll be able to tell me when you get them.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful how you build up. You give the philosophy, and then the final book will be putting it into practice.
For those who have, either experience, one of the things that is so amazing about yoga and the yoga philosophies is that it's not just theory. I mean, there's a lot of theory, right? And there's a lot of heady theory, but it doesn't remain theoretical if you if you care, if you want, and you apply yourself. You yourself can have a first-hand experience, and it's very profound. I remember the first time one of the times I was chanting the Maha Mantra, and I left this world, and I had a direct experience of myself as a spiritual being, and nothing could compare to it. Nothing could compare to it. It was just, and as I had the experience, I was like wanting to hold it and grab it and own it, because it was so profound and so transporting. But as we learn as practitioners, these aren't something that you call on demand or you control. These are gifts, and they are extraordinary. And when we have them, they inform our practice to draw us further on, and they call us, they beckon us, come forward. Yes, this is the way. Yes, there's more to life than what meets the eye, and you are the more. Come look for yourself. Come find yourself. So this is the beauty of bhakti, and so in Living Bhakti, I'm inviting. So now come to the practice so that you can verify if these claims are accurate or not, because that's what we should do, right? I mean, if anything is true in these yoga philosophies, then aren't we called to find out? Absolutely. If there's a spiritual reality beyond what we're experiencing, if there is more to us than a mind and a body, if there's more than one life, and if we have a source and we have a relationship with the source who is a real person, then what opportunities are we missing if we don't explore that?
Wonderful. Absolutely. Absolutely. As I was thinking, as you were speaking, I was thinking that, I've been told so many times that to be Krishna conscious is not just to know the philosophy, it's to put the philosophy into practice. It's not just about, studying, like you said, these vast and deep texts that we have. It's not just about studying them, it's about using them in our lives day to day.
It's about living them, yeah. It's about change of of consciousness, an expansion of consciousness, a depth of consciousness, and it changes our perspective on life. I mean, I don't see life the way I saw it before. It's a very different experience once you once the veil of illusion starts to part. There is, yeah, you just don't see all the externals all have meaning. Life becomes intelligent, and there's deeper meaning and purpose in every moment than I had experienced before I came in touch with bhakti.
Yes, yes. So you were talking about, and I could relate to what you were saying about how Durga has become well known within the yoga community. One of the things I do is I'm a yoga instructor. And so, yes, a few years ago, especially, there was so much talk about Durga, Durga, Durga. And, and also we're living in a time where, feminism has become, even more, or I actually feel like it's kind of moved to a different iteration of feminism, and, women are talking about worshiping goddesses and things like that. And I was remembering from Wise Love how you explain this concept of the feminine divine versus the divine feminine, and it also carries through. You mentioned it again in Bhakti Shakti, so I was hoping you could say a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I really feel that Sri Radha is the like undisputed gem of the Bhakti philosophy. And so I wanted to share that. Even like I tried about 10 years ago to do a blog on the feminine divine. And I wanted to talk about the way of the feminine divine, the way the feminine divine shows us toward genuine spirituality. And so I was really cluing in to the global conversation on sacred feminine, the feminine divine, the divine feminine, these terms that are used. And, clearly feminism and goddess, feminism and spirituality kind of intersect at the goddess, at worship of the goddess. And she's become, that goddess worship has become very prominent. And as I was listening to the conversation, where there were seminars and webinars and articles and all this discussion about the sacred feminine, the divine feminine, and I felt that they were so close to having an answer to some of the world problems that we're seeking to solve, the world's ills. But they were missing key elements of understanding the difference between matter and spirit. And so these two terms, feminine, divine, divine, feminine, I think show where we're missing our footing on an understanding of spirit and matter. And I make the distinction because when we say divine feminine, in the English language, as you use those two terms, really what that means, divine feminine, feminine is the key portion of the phrase. And divine means like a divine aspect of the feminine. So feminine in this case means females. And so divine feminine, there's this idea that women are goddesses, right? And it's become very prominent. You're a goddess. We're goddess, and we should claim our goddessness. And we can, there's also an understanding that we can be Durga. So this is contrary understanding to all of the sacred texts in India. We are finite souls, sparks of spirit, and our divinity is in our spiritual nature. But until we understand that, and until we act on that platform, calling ourselves divine feminine is just a misnomer, because we have to actually come to the spiritual platform beyond the mind and body, which means beyond feminist or feminism or female. And then feminine divine, those two terms together where the two words are switched, the main term is divine. So now we're talking about real divinity, but it's the feminine face of divinity. We're talking about goddess, the divine goddess, in its true form, of whom we are a reflection. We are not the feminine divine. We are a reflection, a ray of the feminine divine. So not distinguishing these concepts muddles our understanding of spirituality. And so that's what one of the things I'm trying to do in Bhakti Shakti is kind of like separate the threads of understanding so we can become very clear, because our understanding of spirituality is very convoluted. We've, as Eastern thought has come into Western thought and mixed, and before it's really clearly understood, with kind of like undigested concepts are coming in and confusing things. So I think it's important for those who have been schooled in the depth of yoga philosophies to really bring these points to the fore for us to make those distinctions. Because, if we're mistaking the female as divine instead of understanding that there is a feminine divine, then we're not going to find the solutions to the problems that we're seeking to resolve. Because we're not going to find them through material means. They're going to have to be through spiritual means. We can't solve material problems with material thoughts, because the material thoughts are what created the material problems. We have to have, we have to be blessed with spiritual concepts and understanding and behavior to actually shift the problems created by material thinking.
Yes, and I was wondering if you could maybe, first of all, the book does a beautiful job of explaining what you just said, and how the thing that struck me was, again, being in the yoga community, the yoga asana community, that and seeing this worship of the goddess. It really reading the book, it made it so clear. I wanted to just give it to everybody.
Please do.
I wanted to say, this is how we truly worship the goddess, and not all these things that are made up, and and like you said, are connecting more to matter and our material selves, and not at all connecting to our spiritual selves. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about where Srimati Radharani's place is amongst, the goddesses of Hinduism or in Bhakti tradition.
Yeah. You had said how there was an explanation of Bhakti Shakti, how to worship the goddess. In fact, one of the main things I set out to do in writing that book, well, it was two things. One is, as I was listening to the global conversation about the sacred feminine and worship of the goddesses, as I read, I was noticing that there was a lot of how would you say? I can't remember the word right now, but it was like we weren't actually, there was taking advantage of the goddess, not actually honoring the goddess. And that's one thing. And then the other thing was not understanding that these are real people. These aren't myths or archetypes or metaphors, which is how they're always taken. Durga and all her expansions, we hear about this one does this for you, this one does this. If you want this kind of big, benefit or understanding about life or yourself, or you want to embody this quality, then worship this goddess. And we need to understand that in the yoga philosophies, in the thousands and thousands and thousands of verses, there's not one statement anywhere that says these gods and goddesses are metaphors or archetypes or made up. They're not made up. And one of the points I make in Bhakti Shakti is, the Vedas are very serious philosophical tomes. These aren't light texts or just indigenous works by people who, just worship the sun, and which is nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, we can appreciate the gifts that we were given in this world. But these are serious tomes on the nature of consciousness that have been looked to by the greatest minds in the world. And so why are there gods and goddesses in them? They're just going off their rockers by talking about them, or do these gods and goddesses actually exist? So at least, whether you want to believe whether they exist or not, at the very least, we have to accept that they're not referred to as archetypes and metaphors. These are real people. And so we're talking about having relationships with real people. And these are not ordinary people. We're talking about Durga Ma, the goddess of the whole material energy, or Sri Radha, the goddess of the entire spiritual world. These are extraordinary personalities. And so what is our approach, and how are we to approach? And I think that's a really important part of how to conceive of bringing them into our lives, is accepting them as real people by hearing from the sacred texts who they are and how energy is personified, how this is a concept that's understood, we understand practically in our daily lives. We're energy and we're personified. And modern science sees how energy is personified. It's the whole material world is simply an energetic basis. So what we see as hard, we consider hard matter, is oscillating packets of energy and information. So even modern science understands that energy is personified, and the Vedas say, yeah, they're personified. And the goddess of the material world is Durga Ma, and the goddess of the spiritual world is Sri Radha. So, so what was your question about Sri Radha? I had to explain that part.
Yeah, that was wonderful, actually. I was just asking you, kind of just trying to hear from you about who Sri Radha is, in terms of, we have all this goddess worship, but how does she compare with the other goddesses? What is her role?
Yes, right. So I went into that long explanation because before we talk about Sri Radha and her role, I want us to acknowledge that if we're not accepting her as a real person, then we aren't approaching her from how she's approached within the tradition that she appears in. And we need to approach her from the perspective that she's presented to us, and we need to approach her with respect. So in our understanding, you can get really quite simple. We have the material energy and the spiritual energy. Durga Ma is the goddess of the material energy. Radha is the goddess of the spiritual energy. Everything comes originally from spirit. Matter comes from spirit. Spirit doesn't come from matter. So Sri Radha, as the primal energy of spirit, is the primal goddess. She is the goddess, the fountainhead, from which all goddesses come. Durga, the Celtic goddesses, the Roman goddesses, the indigenous goddess, the Egyptian goddesses, they're all coming from their source, their origin, Sri Radha. So that's how we understand Sri Radha. And that does not make light of or in any way disrespect any of the goddesses. What I had hoped with Bhakti Shakti is that we could come to a greater appreciation of all the goddesses through an understanding of Sri Radha and how to approach a goddess without trying to take, but become lovers and givers, which is the mood of the goddess. And which I found interesting when I was looking at the different worship of goddesses, that I saw this this approach to the goddesses from many practitioners, not all, but many, some that I saw, was one of more, taking from the goddess, not giving to the goddess. And I thought that was so contrary to what the goddess represents. And I thought if I could point that out, then all of those of us who worship goddesses could enhance our worship of the goddess by seeing this this issue within the goddess circles.
Yes, that often seems to be the way with what people perceive as worship, that for them it's to get something in return and to take, and that's contrary to bhakti,
Yeah, and I think, what I thought was so interesting when I saw this, it's like we're approaching the goddess to exploit her. But we're approaching a goddess to begin with because we've been exploited.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting that we have missed this connection, that we're turning to this female representation of divinity because of the exploitation and abuse that we've experienced. And we're just taking that and putting it in on our worship of the goddess. We have to take out that exploitative tendency, which is the material tendency. That's the consciousness of the false ego, of taking for myself. What can I get for myself instead of what can I give to others, which is the mood of the goddess, the feminine divine.
Yes, absolutely. That's such a beautiful point. And that point alone can just change everything, because we can't build a connection with anyone if you're just constantly taking and not giving in return. And, that's how you build a relationship. As you spoke earlier, it's about building a relationship, and you can't do that if you're continually taking and not, it's just.
And even if it's not continual, whatever the amount of taking is there, it's not pure love. And what we want, what we're searching for is pure love, is divine love. And divine love is absolutely devoid of a taking, exploitative tendency. So anywhere we see it in ourselves, either in the worship of the goddess or in our lives, we should work on removing it.
Absolutely. So you're making me think of the times that we're in now, where it's so much about taking, from Mother Earth, from wherever we can get it sometimes. And I think it's so wonderful that you've written this book now. And so what inspired you? What brought you to really write about Sri Radha at this time in our history? I mean, because I think everything about her is what we need right now.
Yeah. I mean, we've always needed her in the sense that from an existential level, as spiritual beings, we are in absolute need of love, and we're in absolute need of pure love. It's what's driving us, and we don't really understand that this is the need of the soul. So we've always needed her. And I, as far as like now, I don't think that I have kind of like some kind of vision that it's specifically now. I was gifted to write it at this time, and it came out at this time, and it has something of value for us at this time. But I think she's always, the thing is that Sri Radha is a very guarded secret in the Bhakti community. And for those who are not Bhakti practitioners, they may not understand that giving a book on Sri Radha is kind of like breaking open the treasure chest and sharing the jewels that are very carefully guarded in the Bhakti community, because she is so sacred and she is so important to the Bhakti practitioner, not only as an ultimate goal of service, but as an ideal representative of the highest state of spiritual attainment that the soul can attain. This experience of pure divine love for our source in a reciprocal exchange in what we call the dance of divine love. And because she is such a rare attainment and she is so exalted, there's a lot of caution around speaking about Sri Radha, because she's not something that's cheap. And even long time, very advanced practitioners revere her with such a regard, have such regard for her, that there's a sense where, be careful of using her name. Don't abuse her name even. So I think what's interesting about Bhakti Shakti is that I just kind of like start to give you a hint of Sri Radha. I don't like share everything about Sri Radha. I mean, you really have to be a practitioner and have revealed within your heart the full nature of Radha to begin to appreciate her. But I do think that doesn't mean we cannot give hints about her to the world, because she has so much to offer us, even in our preliminary approach, what to speak of those who are advanced in practice. And so Bhakti Shakti in some ways is like, I took some time to set the stage for how to understand and appreciate Sri Radha, her position, what she has to offer the world, what she has to offer us as individuals. And but basically, her example is inviting us to our highest spiritual prospect, that we can have an intimate relationship with the Supreme Person. That is quite extraordinary in the theological world. We have a concept of God, Almighty, omnipresent, all-powerful, all-knowing, like, oh my God, like how do you approach such a person? And what we're talking about is that Sri Radha, the embodiment of love, has conquered the infinite through love. And we can do the same. Us, our tiny little fallen selves, through a purification of the heart, can become embodiments of divine love that conquer the Supreme. And we can have a relationship with Him, an intimate, personal relationship with this Supreme Person, our source, throughout eternity. In any way we choose to relate to Him, we could serve Him, we could become His intimate friend and play with Him and wrestle Him on the ground, or we can become His lover, or we can nurture Him as a parent would nurture a child. This is like unheard of, okay? These are secrets of the spiritual reality that are extraordinary. We don't see them in any other tradition. We do not have specific knowledge of the Supreme Person that we have in Gaudiya Vaishnavism anywhere. And Sri Radha says, this is it. Come with me, I invite you. And I'm the one that's going to open up this opportunity for you. And all I want you to do is sing sing the names of your source in love. And that way your approach will be open and you'll be welcomed into one of these relationships that are possible with the Supreme Person.
Beautiful. And I was thinking of a line from your book, from Bhakti Shakti, and it is where there is perfect love, there is a perfect object of love. So can you tell us who or what is the perfect object of Sri Radha's love?
Yeah, I tell the story of Sri Radha's birth to introduce the perfect object of love, because we hear that she was not conceived and born in ways that we think of human birth, right? We think she was found on a lotus flower in a sacred river, and she appeared to be blind and deaf until she came in touch with the love of her heart, Krishna. And we hear through the Vedic text that Krishna is what's a term known as Swayam Bhagavan, means he is the heart of the Absolute. His form is the original form of the non-dual consciousness that is manifest in three different aspects. So she, through her birth, where we see she's blind, deaf, dumb, until she comes into contact with the perfect object of love, she's pointing us in the direction of Sri Krishna as the Supreme Person. So the idea there is that if you see perfect love, there must be the repository of where that perfect love can go. Otherwise, perfect love cannot exist. And Sri Radha is the perfect lover. So there must be a receiver, a recipient of that love, and her beloved. So that is Sri Krishna. And I take some time to explain his position according to the ancient texts. And so it's not just a sentimental idea that, we like Radha and we kind of like Krishna, but these are profound theological points that are found in the ancient Bhakti texts. So Sri Krishna is Radha's perfect object of love. He's our perfect object of love. He's our source. And we're invited into that relationship through Radha's example of how to develop and express pure love.
Yes, and it reminds me of how you were speaking just earlier about the different ways, the different rasas that we can connect with Krishna, and the story, as you just told it, of her birth, reminded me of that, once we have so much that we can learn from her and how to love and connect with the divine. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. Also in your book, you mentioned Lord Caitanya.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about who he is.
Yeah, that's a complex conversation as well. Tiffany, I introduced Sri Caitanya because we understand from his numerous biographies and those who, he was a historical personality from 500 years ago, and his life is very telling. He was an incredible scholar, but he didn't leave us any writings. What he did is he left us a life of an example of an extraordinary mystical life that was fully absorbed in love of God. And even people outside the tradition who saw him or studied his life have noted that he is unique within the theological world that we don't find anyone displaying the symptoms of, say, the madness of overwhelming love of God. He exhibited extraordinary symptoms, losing consciousness, falling on the ground and rolling in ecstasy. And it would take a while for his followers to bring him back into external consciousness. And he would, call out throughout the day and night, "Oh, where is Krishna? Where is my Krishna? Where is the Lord of my heart?" And his everywhere he would look, he would see Krishna manifest, or think of his his pastimes in Vrindavan and his beautiful forests of Vrindavan. Whatever he would see would remind him, and it would put him in the state of divine madness, which has been chronicled by the intelligentsia and literateurs of his day. These were not, these were educated people and great poets and thinkers and philosophers who had witnessed this and shared this extraordinary experience of being in his presence and seeing his constant state of ecstatic transformations. So he's known as the father of Kirtan, Sri Chaitanya. In the 6th century, there's something called the Bhakti movement that began, basically, where Kirtan became prominent. The Kirtan, which is the singing of poetry and mantras to evoke the presence of the divine. And anyway, the Bhakti movement went from the 6th to the 16th century, and Sri Chaitanya was known as one of the great saints of the Bhakti movement. In fact, he stood out as a prominent figure within 10 centuries of these Bhakti saints. And his kirtan was unique in it, and that's what we come to Prema Kirtan when we talk about Sri Chaitanya, because what he gave us was the particular type of kirtan called Prema Kirtan, the kirtan of the Maha Mantra. And although the kirtans of the 6th, 7th, these through the centuries had really transformed the spiritual marketplace of India, so to speak, they were not, still Sri Chaitanya's kirtan was extraordinary and unique. And what we have, the theologians within the Bhakti tradition have looked at Sri Chaitanya's life and what he spread, what he gave, and they say, if we look closely here, this is a continuance of Krishna Lila from the Bhagavatam is continuing. And it's continuing because Krishna, being so moved by the love of Sri Radha and the other maidens, the other gopis, he was so overpowered by their selfless love that he said, how can I repay you? I want to repay you. And I'm God, I should be able to repay you. But your love is so pure, I'm not sure what to do. And so there's a description by our spiritual teachers that what he did is he took the mood of Radha and came as Sri Chaitanya to spread the glories of Sri Radha through the holy name and give us all the opportunity to associate with Sri Radha and take up the path of purifying the heart to develop divine love. And this is the method to do that, which is described in the Upanishads. It's the only mantra described in the Upanishads that is a Maha Mantra that is meant for this day and age. So within the tradition, we see Sri Chaitanya as Krishna taking the mood and complexion of Sri Radha and spreading her love through the Maha Mantra through the Kirtan of the Mahamantra. Very esoteric, needs more explanation, and but it's you're taken step by step in Bhakti Shakti there, where it can be better understood than in a short conversation here.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for giving that introduction, that teaser into the glories of Lord Chaitanya. And because it, like you said, it is such a deep subject, and it's the primary practice, or the primary service within our practice is chanting. So, yeah.
It's the way the Supreme is communicating with us is through sacred sound.
Mm-hmm. So is there anything else, Pranada, that you would like to share with us about Bhakti Shakti? I think I heard that it's translated into several languages now, right?
Well, it's been translated into Spanish. And it's in production now. The Spanish translation is in production. I think it would be available within the next 2 or 3 months.
Oh, wow.
And there are some people in Italy who read it that were very moved by it, and now there's a translation occurring in Italian. So that is just beginning. That might take some time. So 2 languages, and it's available for translation in the other languages. If someone wants to contact me, that is welcome. Wise Love is also in Spanish, and I've just heard that it's now being translated into Mongolian.
Wow.
Yeah, there was some Bhakti practitioners in Mongolia that were doing a podcast, and they were, I guess, reading from Wise Love, into Mongolian. And it got such a reception, they decided they wanted to translate the book. Wow. So that's nice. I have hopes that it will be translated into other languages as well. I think these books are really good tools to use to introduce these concepts and to welcome others in a way that is non-threatening and inviting, relatable, relevant.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I didn't even realize there were devotees in Mongolia, but it doesn't surprise me. It's
amazing.
Yeah. And yes, I'm sure that Bhakti Shakti will also be translated into more languages, because it is, like you said, it's a good entry into Bhakti and a beautiful introduction to Sri Radha that I haven't seen anywhere else. Not that I've seen every book written on Radharani, but I haven't seen anything that's so comprehensive and yet so complete. And so thank you.
There's not actually a lot about Radha. I mean, we have the esoteric texts that are for public consumption, but otherwise, there's not. I mean, I looked. There's not really anything out there. So
breaking ground.
Yeah, hopefully it's a nice offering for the spiritual community, and that will move hearts and lives and help us on our way.
Well, I absolutely have been inspired by it, and I'm sure everyone who's read it so far has felt the same. It's a lovely piece of work, and like I said before, it's so inviting, and I just kind of got into the energy of it. I was excited to read the next page. So thank you so much for your offering of writing this book and of writing Wise Love, and I can't wait to see the other 2 books when they're available.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you
for welcoming them.
Oh, and thank you so much for this opportunity to have this conversation with you and to introduce the book to more people.
Yeah, thank you for helping get the word out. it's my service, so it's meaningful to me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Hare Krishna.